Hey, I guess it's good we didn't start at 6:30 tonight. Still a lot of people coming in, but we'll go ahead and get started with our service. Kenny will be sharing. Paul's going to be leading us in a few songs here. I thought I would just open with just a few Bible verses as we think about the subject that we're going to be thinking about and addressing, and Kenny will be speaking about. So I found the passage in Deuteronomy Chapter 6. It says, "Hear, Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart, and you shall repeat them diligently to your sons, and speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk on the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. You shall also tie them as signet to your hand, and they shall be as frontlets on your forehead. You shall also write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." So as we think about families, we think about children, we think about parents relating to children, I don't think we want to think about a system, or we want to think about a program so much as something that we do as a way of life, something that is incorporated into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, every day of the week, into our work, into our play, into our family time, into our recreation. It's just something that's kind of built in and a way of relating to each other. And in the process, there is a message that is given and a lesson that is taught throughout the course of a lifetime. And so tonight I'm really looking forward to what Kenny has to share, and looking forward to spending this time together. I didn't ask Kenny, but are you going to have a time for questions afterwards, after the session, or not necessarily? Okay, all right. Okay, well, we'll let that go. Paul will be leading us in. Okay, so we'll turn the time over in just a few minutes, or a minute or two here, to Paul. Before we do that, let's just bow our heads for prayer, and then after the singing, Kenny will just take it from there. So Lord, it's a blessing to be gathered together on this freezing cold January night. Thank you for a good working furnace, a warm place to be, a well-lit place, and good people to spend an hour or two with this evening. Pray your special blessing, especially on Kenny, as he thinks about what to share, how to share it, how to present what you have already laid on his heart, and help us to be able to receive it and incorporate it into our lives. So we just commit every part of this service to you with thanksgiving in Jesus' name. Amen. Probably most of you already know that for the children, I think it's ages 5 and under, there's childcare being provided in the basement so that the parents hopefully can have some undistracted time here. So thank you. I'll turn the time to Paul.
All right, good evening. All right, let's sing 669 first. 669.
Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy grace, Lord, like a fetter, bind my heart alone to thee. Sore temptation, Lord, I feel it. Passion, strength to quench my love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above.
And we gotta find a song that maybe fits the evening a little bit. 956. 956. Wisdom. What is wisdom? Happy to sing. I hope it's not bad. I think we remember how to sing it, but it might have been a while. So let's skip verse. I'm gonna try to skip. Let's skip verse 2. Let's skip verse 2, 1, 3, 4, and 5.
Oh, happy days of tender years, instructions, warning boys, and whose celestial wisdom makes his early only choice, his early only choice. In her right hand is like the face of those who heed her voice. Her left hand offers wealth and praise to make her sons rejoice, to make her sons rejoice. She guides the young with innocence in pleasures past to dread. A crown of glory she bestows upon the hoary head, upon the hoary head. According as her labors rise, so her rewards increase. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace, and all her paths are peace.
And let's just sing full verses of Come Gracious Spirit before Kenny comes. Okay.
Come, gracious Spirit, heavenly dove, with light and comfort from above. Be thou our guardian, thou our guide, for every thought and step beside, for every thought and step beside. The light of truth to us display, and make us know and choose thy way. Plant holy fear in every heart, that we from God may ne'er depart, that we from God may ne'er depart.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for coming out tonight. I certainly don't have a lot of experience talking about child training. I think in 26 years, I may have had one message once about it, maybe 5 years ago. I'm not even sure about that. There's a reason for it. Maybe that'll come out during the message some. But as we just for starters here, just picture with me that we're in Walmart and there's an episode going in aisle 6 where there's a mother and a 4-year-old child having issues, and you can hear throughout most of Walmart this child screaming and the mother yelling back at it. And I think all of us may have experienced something like that. Here's my question: what are you feeling? What's going on inside your heart? You're not the mother, you're not the child. What are you feeling? Compassion. Okay. I think I would picture myself as a little Amish boy, maybe 3 years old, watching this scene with I'm in the shopping cart, just sitting there watching this scene, and I've never seen like it in my life. I'm just like, my jaw is dropped, and I'm like, what is going on here? And I don't know. I don't understand it. So the thing I think some of us would feel is that child needs to be spanked. Doesn't that mother know what? And some of us want to go straighten the child out. Some of us want to go straighten out the mother out. But I would like to invite us to feel what Rebecca said, that we would feel compassion and understanding. And I would like to suggest that the last thing that child needs at that moment is a spanking. I didn't say children never ever need a spanking, but in that setting, that's the last thing that needs to happen. So somebody asked me, why are we having this subject? And the answer was pretty simple, because Laban asked me for it, okay? But we probably should go a little deeper than that into this subject. So why? Does it take a village to raise a child? I think some of us, our minds go straight to a certain Hillary Clinton who wrote a book, It Takes a Village, and the reaction against that book and the suspicion around it. But this is actually not her statement. It's actually an African proverb. It takes a village to raise a child. But what Hillary said was, it is not the parent's primary role, it's the government's primary role. And that's why the reaction was, because it felt like the government knew better how to raise your children than what you do. But I'd like to change that a little bit here tonight. And if we're in this together, and the question is, are we or aren't we? Because that little child, you could also bring it to church, and it's making a scene at church. And you could have the same question asked. And I think parents feel a lot of pressure sometimes in that setting because their child has to behave and all their energy is taken up and there's no energy left to worship because the vibes they're getting are not friendly. So the question is, are we actually in this together, or is something else going on? But if we're in it together, is it the parents' primary responsibility to raise the child, or is it the churches or the communities? It's a fair question because in a lot of conservative settings, how the children and youth behave becomes a reflection of the health of the church. So there winds up being people that take on themselves responsibilities that are really not theirs. So I think while it may take a village, it's not the village's child. We're there to support and help. Secondly, we want to find a path to life. That's what we want to do. We want to find a path to life. Third, and this is how, we want to develop spiritually and emotionally healthy adults with the capacity to live fully and freely into their purpose and His will, their eternal purpose and His will. So in this talk, which is tonight and tomorrow night, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about my personal experience and why I believe what I want to believe. I'll take some time here tonight. Then I want to answer the question, what is a child? What are we actually dealing with? And then I want to talk about the practical side of shaping the child, facing the failures of what we've done at understanding what is it we've done right, and having Him transform our goals. Because I'm suspicious that His goals are not always the same as ours are. So why do I believe what I believe? I want to talk about my experience. So when Glennon was only a few years old, I started teaching school. And I taught at 4 different schools. The third 3 were schools that I started teaching at last minute or even during the year because the schools were out of control. So my image of what was normal was shattered. Meanwhile, I watched many people leave the community, some to more traditional communities, some to less traditional churches, for greener pastures to raise their children. The reviews were back, and some of the stories were disappointing, and some were downright disastrous. One story I remember was horse and buggy load of children and parents left a farm Sunday afternoon from church 2 miles south of Arthur. And the father made the comment, "This thing is so dead it stinks." And that was their last Sunday to church. And they joined the Mennonite church. And here, at this time, 40 years later, none of his children were believers. He was divorcing his wife after 40 years. He was a taxi driver and couldn't be trusted with women. There was another story. This is actually a relative. He moved out to a more conservative Amish community, and he said, "I'm leaving Sodom and Gomorrah," of course, to raise his children better. And now his son, my cousin, was dealing drugs. He was poaching deer, and he wound up hiding from ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, for 20 years. And many were moving back into the community. But neither were the results in the community that great. I think I counted out of 10 cousins, both Amish and not Amish, I think 7 of them were out there. I mean, about drugs and whatever else. One of my close friends was killed in a motorcycle accident, one that I had helped into drugs. He was drunk when he was killed. At the same time, there was a lot of good people coming out of that too. It wasn't all bad. We had 4 children by then. But what I took away from that, looking back, I realized that my teaching school in so many different areas and difficult realities, along with the fact that the community, in that community, and most people's personal worldviews, unique practices ran along family lines, were well known. And the only thing there is to talk about in the middle of a cornfield is people. And talk about people we did. Everyone got their turn to be talked about. So we knew how they handled their children and what they did and when they should have done this and when they did that. So my observation, my first takeaway was, there must be factors other than the color of the grass that affects the outcome of child development. By the color of the grass, of course, I'm talking about the setting or the environment the child is being raised in. And so what were these other factors? Being in the best church and community were not a common denominator to desired outcomes. That was the first takeaway. Being in the best church was not a common denominator or the best community. There had to be other factors. So I literally got my Amish directory out and started scribbling in it, studying extended families and their ways of handling children, and now what 3-4 generations in, how it was working out for them. I began doing research on what those other factors might be, and I came away with 2 main denominators that were common in less desirable outcomes. And by less desirable, I'm talking about unbelievers, raising unbelievers. And here's the 2 that I came up with. Families that valued image at the expense of authenticity. The second was families that believed that utopia was the path of life, and getting there depended on making the right choices. This often resulted in an aloof separatism, even within the Amish, toward other Amish people. And that wasn't necessarily just people that left or didn't leave. It was throughout the whole thing. Is if you believed in utopia, like there's a certain thing in our separated lifestyle that somehow believes that we can create this environment where we'll have nothing but good results. And it's up to us to figure out how that is. Well, with that, I have to put outside anything that is not good. So if I determine you are not good, I have to put you outside of that. And so it's up to me to guard this. That was a very, very huge common denominator. You might ask why? What's wrong with making right choices? There's nothing wrong with making right choices, but here's the deal. There's actually more set against us than you can handle by yourself. You actually need God, and you need other people to be on your side. You cannot outsmart the devil. You actually need help. And when you're relying on your own self to do this, the results aren't good. These two observations steered me clear of some of the main conservative Christian child training experts of that day. And some of you actually learned a lot from these people. I'm just saying that I went like this. The Godly Home series by Kenny Kuhns, there was a lot of utopia in that, so I went around that one. Bill Gothard, there's a whole lot of separatism that came out of that. Michael and Debbie Pearl, I went around that one too. And another thing was that people that talked about how much better their church was than others, I didn't participate in that. At the same time and separately, I was highly influenced by an Amish minister I deeply respected. And that took me to books like Healing of Damaged Emotions by David Siemens, Dare to Discipline, Strong-Willed Child, Turning Your Hearts Toward Home, video series by Dr. James Dobson. Ironically, I treated my children the same way as all those influencers I avoided taught to do. So, over the last 30 years, I walked with many people that didn't have normal settings. And so this is one of the reasons I did not ever speak on this subject, because I would sit there and hear a visiting minister like this come in and talk about child raising, and he would say all kinds of things that were right and were actually good, but they wound up not being helpful in a lot of settings, because he was saying was that if you don't have a utopia, if you don't have ideal situations, you don't have two parents, you don't have this, you don't have that, you're pretty much done for. And there was just a lot of people that were left without hope. And I was walking with those people. That reshaped a lot of what I had to think and how I saw things through their eyes. And it's a main reason why I haven't spoken about it since then. So another reason is these influencers that I just mentioned are all psychologists. And psychologists are highly suspect. But they did, in fact, influence my life. And I just want to say from that perspective, that is still stuff I learned. Now, I had another whole side of me that was not helpful. That was my own narcissism. All these things I didn't like, I had inside myself. Active. The whole superior thing, everything was all there. So I'm not going to totally disparage myself with that, but today, I think that our children are really the results of multiple factors, but a huge one is the grace of God. Huge. Another common denominator in unhealthy outcomes was families or organizations or churches that used children as pawns in a chess game to further their own causes. That was a huge common denominator in things not turning out right. Huge. And it's very common. It happened a lot in this building. I remember it happens a lot of places. It needs to stop. But I remember I was walking with Milo in the early 90s at Faith Builders when they were first starting up. And one day I was meeting with Milo and some of their staff. At one point, they all lived in the main center of the building there. And they were going on about how terrible Milo's children were. And, they just went on. It's just terrible. He was just disqualified for how bad his children were. And at some point, I half believed him. And I said to Milo, Milo, you just got to get your children to behave. And he said, Kenny, I won't do it. Those are my children. They're not to be played. And of course, his children turned out wonderful. But I was told in this building once that I should quit preaching because my children they were disqualifying me. So Lucas looks at himself and said, that must have been me that disqualified you. I'm just saying, when these things happen, they destroy. They're not the village becomes part of the problem, not part of the solution. So what are healthy outcomes? Those are the unhealthy ones. What is a path to healthy adult relationships is found when you find a common language. And as I watch my grandchildren, I really love to watch this. When a baby first is born, they cry. And the reason they cry is because they want something. And so someone is smart enough to figure out what they want. And so they give them what they want. So that's how, but as they grow up, they start to be able to communicate in more socially acceptable ways. And as with watching Charles, he uses really, really good English. And I can remember being very young, just telling him, look, you don't have to do that. You actually can talk. And to have him actually say what he wants and respond to that, that's a common language. But when it comes to common language, it's a way to connect. There's a connection. It's huge. But I want to use my son, Stephen, who has never learned to talk English, as an example of a common language. Because what happens in that is you have to actually learn to know. And there has to be an actual engagement. I mean, if we can't just quickly walk out and say, hey, Mary Beth, you come over and take care of Stephen today. She'd be like, because she would not have a clue because there's no way of communicating with her. Why? Because she has no connection. And I have to admit that I'm not very good at it, but I can still tell. We can lay in bed at night and hear by the sounds, and we're actually tuned to his sounds to know that he needs something. But that's a connection. That's a common language. And so there's an understanding. Just a few days ago, Gwen was really sick. I came to the house and Irma was she was crying and crying. And then Lucas came in and he tried to quiet her. And that didn't help a little bit, but pretty soon his mom came in the door and it was the answer to everything. Why? Because the common language was the safest and it was the most together. And so that is actually the biggest piece is that you actually have a common language. You actually can know. That's not something the government knows or any organization knows. It's something that the parents know. What does Jesus say about children? Matthew 19, then there were brought unto him little children, that he should put his hands on them and pray. And the disciples rebuked them. And Jesus said, suffer the little children and forbid them not to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. They laid hands on them and departed thence. Do you ever wonder why these grown men wanted the children to go away? These were choice men, too. Why did they want the children to go away? They were in the way because they had more important things to do. A chapter before that, Matthew 18, the very first part of it says this, at the same time, some of the disciples came the disciples unto Jesus saying, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Seriously? And Jesus called a little child unto him and set him in the midst of them and said, verily I say unto you, except you be converted and become as a little child, you cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever shall receive one such little child in my name receiveth me. But whosoever shall offend one of these little ones, which believe in me, it is better for him that a millstone was hang around his neck, that he should be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that the offenses come, but woe unto the man that by whom the offenses come. So what does it mean for us to become as a little child? You know, we're here today wanting to learn how to train children, but that verse sounds more like we're supposed to learn something from them. Today I was having a conversation with a grown man my age, and he was telling me how he had chest problems across here. He'd be out shoveling manure or snow or something, and he'd just get these chest pains, and he'd have to sit down, and had a few other problems, and he didn't tell his wife, he didn't tell nobody about it. And one time he was sitting there puffing in the barn, and one of his sons came in there and caught him. And that spilled the beans, and so he wound up going to the doctor and doing a EKG and stress tests and all these things. Of course, I'm sitting there listening to him talk and thinking about children. How is a child different than that? They would have let the world know right away, right? So what's the difference? This is a really weird man, right? That's just off the charts, right?
Children know they're dependent.
Okay. But off you. I need help.
We might not think so far ahead, like, it doesn't mean nothing's the matter, but they live in the moment.
They live in the moment. They don't have to think about tomorrow that much. What else? Do children have pride? Okay. Actually, they do. Okay. They kind of mislay their halos on occasion too. Okay. At least I've known a few that do. I learned that statement from Steve years ago when he was babysitting his brother Paul's children. I'm going to suggest that one of the things that children do that we need to learn, and the Bible uses this language actually, is we need to be able to cry out. How about just crying out? So what is a child? A child, and I'm thinking about this precious, wrapped in swaddling clothes, newborn. What is it? Is it a small human? What is it? Well, it is a small human, but it's a body, a soul, and spirit. Okay? The body is a brain, a heart, limbs, mouth. The mouth has a tongue in it that can talk, and it also can swallow food that goes to the stomach, and the stomach goes to intestines. That's the body. The soul is the mind, will, and emotions. The spirit is eternal, and it comes inscribed with good, and that good is, I'm summing up as eternal purpose, and the evil is the desire for control. Now, I actually had overheads for this, and I couldn't get my laptop to work, so I have to write some of this out here, because while these things are all separate, they all actually reflect on each other. So if I put across here body, well, my laptop didn't work, now my pen doesn't work. We're uptown now. All right, forget it. So if you put body, soul, spirit, 3 words, body, soul, spirit. Now underneath those words that I just read, on the first line, brain, mind, and inscription. Okay? You have a brain, and that brain, when there's trauma, when things happen, when you learn things, it affects the brain. And so how it affects the brain winds up affecting behavior. But that's in the body. So the mind is in the soul, but it's something that's supposed to be renewed. It's something that we yield, but it works out of the mind, and then the inscription is our predisposition towards God or away from Him. That's our eternal nature. That is God's design on our heart. And it is also Satan's design on our heart. So those are three things across on one line. The tongue is in the body. The will is in the soul. And the desire for control on the dark side and desire for eternal purpose on the good side are on the same line. So the will, the tongue, and the desire for good or evil are across these three. Then the third line I have on all three of them, I have worship. So in the body, you worship. In the soul, you worship. And in the spirit, you worship. Okay, so while these three things that we break them apart to understand, there's also ways that they all fit together. Now the next one, I really do need a pen for, but I'm going to assume that the third one ain't going to work either. But picture with me this square here. With this is a newborn here. This is an 18-year-old here. And this is love across the line. This is 100%. This is 0. This is 100%. So you come over here. And so up here, when a newborn is first born, you have 100% control. That child cannot survive without you. But by the time that child is 18, you want that line to have come down here where you have no control over the child. But at the same time, there's a line here going up this way that's influence. Okay? And I think, I don't know who to give this credit to because I couldn't find it, but the line comes up here. By the time it's 18, you have 100% control. But I also, in my drawing, have a line that comes up to here because I'm not sure that the parent would be the only one that has influence on the child. I think you have to let go and let other people and other things have influence as well. But the idea is it's voluntary. From there? No, it's distraction now. How do we impact? One of the touchier things is the subject around spanking. And I want to bring another word in here now as I talk about this. So far I've used the word training. But the other word I want to introduce here is actually development. So how do we facilitate development? That's a different feel to it. So when you're that child back in Walmart or in church or wherever, and you're connected to it, you know its needs, you know what's going on. You're actually facilitating development. You're not just getting them to behave. That's a different story. There's something beyond getting them to behave. So I want to go back to my own experience now. I spanked our children more than I believe in today. I'm not here to say that spanking is wrong, totally, but I certainly spanked our children more than I would today. And the reason I say that is not because my children are today, they're saying, you spank way too much. I did a poll earlier this week, and a lot of them don't remember, some of them don't remember ever being spanked. But believe me, they were. And I remember it. And I remember times it was wrong. This morning I was in a conversation with a guy, and he told me how he was in church, and he had a very sensitive boy, and that little boy would, you said you raise your eyebrow, he'd just fall to pieces. Now his sister, she was not that way, and she got spanked a lot. But he said one Sunday after church, the two other guys, he named the other two guys, their boys were tearing around in the church house, and so was his own son. And he just took his own son out and spanked him, thinking, as an adult, that this little boy understands why he's getting spanked, because he was told not to run in the church house. And here he was running the church house. But on the way home, this little boy was still whimpering. He said, it's not fair. And bless his heart, he didn't bend him over and spank him right there. He realized what had happened. He had spanked the little boy more because he was mad at the other two fathers for not straightening their children up. And he right there said to his little boy, I made a mistake. It was that fast that little boy stopped whimpering. He went right into a healthy place, and he was fine. There's several reasons I tell that story. One is, as I look back at the times that I feel like I was wrong when I spanked, for whatever reason, I did love. I did love. I'm not talking about abuse them or something. That's not what it was ever. But even if I was wrong, I did love. They say that the old ones get more spankings than the younger ones. Not true at our house. I didn't ask for permission for this, but my daughter Virginia got more spankings than the rest of them put together. But there was something misaligned with development that we had to pay for later in life. And fortunately, we got through it. And what she remembers is being loved, not being abused. And it wasn't ever intended for that. It was just that common language was not there. It wasn't, we didn't know what we're dealing with. So I think that what's going to happen is, although I spank too much, my children will probably spank too little, and my grandchildren will spank too much, and my great-grandchildren will spank too little. That's kind of how the ball rolls, okay? And so what I want to do over the next few minutes and tomorrow night is I want to think about other tools that we could use. And I want to say that if you go back to Walmart and that child, little Amish boy, me, sitting there slack-jawed watching the tantrum, I'm going to suggest that neither one of those is automatically a healthy situation. Because how this actually works out is not quite that clean. So some of the, I hope there's not a lot of children here thinking, I'm going to get by with more now because Dad heard that, maybe it's not a great thing to spank, so I'm going to, I'm not giving some license for bad behavior, okay? What I wanted to do is for us to understand that there's ramifications. And so what happens with the training side without the development side is that we communicate deeply that behavior is it. Behavior is it. Behaving right is it. When, in fact, God looks on the heart. And so what happens when we're communicated that behavior is right and there's suppression going on, either, and this happens both in the opposite world of spanking as it does in spanking. Because in the opposite way of spanking, there is just as much abuse that happens, and manipulations and lyings and all kinds of, yes, it happens with good intentions, but it is really not healthy. So I didn't live like that, so I'm not going to speak to that as much. But here's a list of a few of the adult issues with spanking being an overused tool in child development. Doing the right thing is more important than the ability to connect with the heart. That's an adult. That's me. The ability to work through conflict is not developed. It's just you did wrong and you're going to be punished. Now everybody's good. Seeing the need for Jesus to transform our nature is an exercise of the brain more than response of the Spirit. But here's the big one, and this goes back to that picture of the body, soul, and spirit, where it's the tongue, the will, and the desire for control. Might is right, and right is might. Become an inner belief that enters difficult relationships. And so often when there's a conflict or you don't know how to go forward, the first question in the adult's mind is, what am I doing wrong? I just sat with a church, 6 leaders sitting there. The church is fixing to split again, second time in 6 years. And they have one question on their mind: what are we doing wrong? They don't have the tools to sit down and engage. Now, I do want to say that there were some things I actually did right with spanking. And my picture, the one of the core things that I believed that I still hold to in spanking was when the child, if the situation was such that there was guilt, I didn't put the guilt on them, there was guilt in them. And they could be punished, and there was relief, and they felt clean, and they felt cared for, they felt loved, they felt forgiven and washed. That actually happens. And I contrast that with you go to your room and you stay there until I tell you could come out. That's the other half of the abuse. It doesn't clear the conscience. It doesn't. But this all happens in a common language. When you know what the needs are of the child. It's not the random person at Walmart that is being irritated that knows what the child needs. Here's the deal. Humans are given a dominant role in the earth. That dominance can be used to seek our own fulfillment, or it can be conformed to His will. As adults, our dominance needs to be conformed to His will if we are safe to engage with the will of a child. Because what happens is if that dominance is used to control, then that's what they learn. But when it's a service, it's a completely different story. Earlier this week, I did something that I wasn't sure I should have done. I sent out on the men's chat a video of a preacher just literally berating one of his parishioners and kicking him out of church. And he just stood there and just yelled at him and whatever else, and you did this and you did that, you're out of here, go out. And pretty much the consensus was either you walk out when that's happening, or you certainly don't come back for another round of it. But that's adults. That's adults. If that same dominant spirit is against a child, that becomes abusive. But what the tools I want to add is not like some balance between these two extremes, or none of this or none of that, but the whole thing of connecting and working through. I want to show a video right now. See, He draws us, and it's the goodness of God that brings us to repentance. Rather than have a conversation about spanking or not spanking, I want to add healthy tools. Rather than thinking about child training, I want to also think about child development. Now, in doing so, I want to show a couple videos of some things into a common language of understanding. So, Glennon, are we ready? And then I'm going to open it up for questions. The first one, what? Okay, I think we'll end the stream now. The link for these videos will be in the thing, in the description. And we won't put it on the live stream. I'm going to open it up then for you to